فكلي واشربي وقري عينا فإما ترين من البشر أحدا فقولي إني نذرت للرحمن صوما.
Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon all of you. I want to thank you for joining the first episode of the Islamic Mary podcast. I'm really excited to start this podcast, and I want to talk about why I started the podcast. And arguably, it really began when I started my first book on the Bible and the Quran and biblical figures in the Islamic tradition. And in that book, I looked at 48 different figures with my co-author, John Kaltner, that are shared between the Bible and the Quran. And when I was looking at the book, I was surprised to learn and see that there's this many shared figures between the Bible and the Quran. And arguably, this book originated with my name. So as you know, my name is Yunus. And growing up here in the United States, many times I was only Yunus in my class. People didn't really know how to pronounce my name. They would say Yunus or Jonas or Giannis. I remember one story with my football coach where he kept calling me Jonas. And then I told my coach, I said, Coach, my name is Eunice. And then he said, don't worry, Jonas, I'll get it right. And I didn't correct him after that. So growing up with this unusual name, a name that was unique and that other people did not know, I became very conscious of that name. When people had struggled with it and tried to understand it, I would tell people and say, hey, my name is Eunice, and this is equivalent to Jonah. And then people would immediately know and say, oh, Jonah, yeah, I know about Jonah and the whale. So this was a way for me to speak about my name in a way that other people could understand it and connect to Western society and culture. So growing up, I also became really interested in prophetic stories and names. My dad actually comes from a line of prophetic names. So his father had this interest in names of prophets. So he named his first son Ishmael or Ismail. He named his second son Ibrahim or Abraham. His third son Ishaq or Isaac. And then he named my father Yaqub or Jacob. So when my father was having his firstborn child, he went to his father and asked him, what should I name my child? And he said, if it's going to be a girl, then name the child Fatima. And if it's going to be a boy, name him Yunus. So my older sister, Fatima, was born. And then soon afterwards, I was born. And then my dad named me Yunus. So even though I never met my grandfather or spent a lot of time with my uncles in Pakistan, the name in many ways connects me to him and my ancestry there. Also, when I was writing the book, the Bible and the Quran, biblical figures in the Islamic tradition, I became really interested with the figure of Mary or Maryam. And I think I became interested in this figure because throughout my life, I've been surrounded by women, especially strong women. One particular woman that I've been attached to and has been an important mentor and guide for me is my mother. And my mother is a wonderful person, and she's someone who always took us to our local mosque growing up. As we went to the local mosque, she would get us involved with various activities, different programs. She helped us fundraise, and to the point that she actually became on the board of the mosque for 12 years. She was frequently the only woman on the board. And she would tell me stories about her experiences on the board and how she advocated and pushed for particular positions. One memorable story was when the new mosque was going to be built, and there was a discussion of where the men and women should be. So the board was of the opinion that they should build a partition or a wall between the men and women, as this is similar to mosques overseas and even mosques here in the United States. And she said, absolutely not. We're not going to have a wall between the men and the women. In fact, the original mosque, the mosque of the Prophet Muhammad, did not have any barrier of sorts. Rather, men and women were in the same prayer space. She advocated and she said, we're not going to do this. So one of the board members was drawing the floor plans of the mosque on the board, and I was holding a piece of chalk. And as the discussion became very heated, he ended up throwing the chalk on the ground and saying, fine, Dr. Tanvir, you can have your way. And this story for me was memorable because it showed me that you have to advocate for your position. You have to speak up. If you don't speak up and tell your story and what you believe in your morals and ethics, no one is going to do that for you. Secondly, you have to think institutionally. You have to work with the current institution. She could have left the mosque, start her own space, but she felt it would be most productive if she made sure that her views and the views of other people she represented were represented in the mosque itself. And third, you have to speak up for the marginalized, people who may not be in the room, people who may not actually have power or influence, but want to be included in majoritarian spaces. So even though she was the only woman in the room, she felt she had that responsibility to speak up for other women. So growing up in this family, I had also three sisters and no brothers. So I was frequently the odd person out. I would be always tagging along and be like, hey guys, let me play your games and get involved. Other times I would be my by myself in the basement playing sports and other games, to the point that I joined my sister's Girl Scout troop as an honorary member. That they some maybe felt bad for me or they wanted to include me. So growing up in a family with three sisters and a strong mother made me always think about women and women issues. Now I've grown up and I'm a father and I have three daughters of my own. I don't have any sons. And having three daughters and a strong wife who's similar to my mother makes me think about the challenges that women face, whether that be here in America and American society, in the workplace and school, but also in terms of religion and religious spaces and spirituality. I now am part of my daughter's Girl Scout troops, and I'm actually the cookie manager. So if you ever want any Samoas or Thin Mints, let me know. And I think the figure of Mary also generates out of my work on Abraham. So after 9/11, there was a important discussion about the clash of civilizations. I remember I was a college student during 9/11, and I was actually a student at Georgetown University taking Arabic. And one of my fellow students walked in and she said, do you know what happened? And we were all stunned and asked, what happened? And she said, we've been attacked. So class was immediately canceled. I remember going to one of my colleagues' dorm rooms and watching the attacks occur on the television and the Twin Towers bursting in flame. I remember trying to get into my car, driving back, and there was a huge traffic jam of people trying to get home. I was living or going to school in Washington, D.C. at the time. And many people could even see the smoke from the Pentagon that had occurred not too long ago. The cell phone towers were jammed. And I remember going home and feeling my life had changed forever. Later that week, I would go to campus and feel that people might be looking at me differently and that my world had altered and I didn't know what was going to happen next. Now, during that time, there was a discussion about the clash of civilizations. And this book emerged in the early 90s where people were discussing the post-communist threat. And one of the authors, his name is Samuel Huntington, he predicted a new threat. This threat was not going to be the red threat, the communist threat, but it was going to be the green threat, the Islamic threat. And as he famously said, Islam has bloody borders, that there is no way for us to prevent this clash between America and Western society and Muslims and Muslim nations. Now, at the same time, post 9/11, there was a counter narrative, and people were saying, well, maybe we can actually coexist with Muslims and with people from the East. And Abraham became an important figure in this discussion. And there was books on Abrahamic faiths, the idea that Muslims, Jews, and Christians all come from the same family. And they all look at Abraham as a source of piety and unity. And he's someone that can bring people of difference together. And myself, I became really interested in the figure of Abraham. I wrote about him as an iconoclast in the Quran. Also, later on, wrote about the sacrifice of Abraham, of his son, Isaac, Ishaq, or Ishmael, Ismail in the Islamic tradition. I became fascinated on this idea of shared figures and how someone that was represented in the various scriptures could unite people of difference. At the same time, there have been pushback here. People like John Levinson and others have written books say, well, Abraham is found in these various traditions, but at the same time, he's understood differently. And people from these different eras, from these different religions, and understanding within their particular theology. So, as I've been writing on Abraham, I became increasingly interested in Mary or Maryam. And I think Mary provides us with certain possibilities that Abraham doesn't. Part of this podcast is to look at Islam and interreligious studies, Christian Muslim relations, through a figure and through a personality. And I think Maryam, allows us to look more closely at female leadership. One of the discussions today is on the role of women and women in society. We have a first female vice president here in the United States, and we have women increasingly becoming present in religious spaces, whether as ordained pastors or ministers or being resident scholars and chaplains. So I think Maryam allows us to look at these questions of women's role in society and their potential leadership in a unique way. I think also Maryam allows us to look at the Quran and scripture and more closely and to gain better insights within it. Maryam connects us to the Quran as there's a particular chapter named after her. And there are various verses about Maryam scattered throughout the Quran, which we'll look at. And Maryam is also found within the Gospels as an important figure and mother of Jesus. So Maryam, in many ways, connects us to the Quran in the modern age. And Muslims have always been connected to the Quran. They have always memorized the Quran, recited it. But there's a particular interest in the modern area regarding the Quran, of translating it, having commentaries, tafsirs, exegesis. Historically, Muslims might have been connected to particular orders or connected to a particular sheikh or religious leader or guide. In the modern era, there is a renewed emphasis on scripture and seeing how the regular, ordinary believer can connect to the original sources. So Maryam will help us understand some of these key scriptures and how we can better understand them. And I think lastly, Maryam helps us in terms of a diverse and pluralistic world, because she's someone that helps us with coexistence between Christians and Muslims. Currently, right now, around half the world's population is either Christian or Muslim. And by 2050, we'll have Muslims and Christians roughly be around the same amount of numbers because of the demographic growth of the Muslim population. So one of the things we have to think about in a global world where we're trying to seek peace and justice is that global peace depends on the relationship between Christians and Muslims. And in this new world and reality, we will ask ourselves, how can Maryam help unite Christians and Muslims? And how can Maryam help us to find shared spirituality, devotion, while respecting differences in theology and religious practices between the two great faiths? With that, I want to thank you for joining this first podcast. I'm really excited. We're going to look at Maryam in the Quran. We're going to look at Maryam through prophetic traditions, mysticism, theology, art, film. We're also going to look at Maryam in the contemporary age, as how she's used in interreligious and interfaith spaces. And To conclude, I want to invite you to visit my website, dryunusmirza.com. There you see more about me, my bio. You also see some of my research and blogs I've written. And I invite you to join my newsletter, where you can learn more about this podcast, where we can be in touch, and we can continue to learn about the Islamic Mary or Maryam. Thanks once again, and goodbye.